Elizabeth Jane Christopher, 1923-2017. Born in Omaha, Nebraska on December 23, 1923, and she died at home in Yuba City on September 24, 2017. Jane lived in Nebraska and San Leandro, California, and in Yuba City since 2007. Before retirement, she was an office manager in a doctor's office. She loved to cook and entertain. Everyone was always welcome to stay and eat. At mealtime, she had a way of stretching a meal to feed everyone. She enjoyed singing and was a member of many choirs throughout her life. She also loved to sing in the car while driving with her family, which made the trip seem shorter and much more fun. Jane's favorite activities were making crafts and traveling. She continued making Christmas ornaments and handmade and hand-embroidered cards until macular degeneration took her eyesight. In her younger years, she took many challenging camping trips across the U.S. to collect rare rocks. And as she grew older, the trips became less strenuous and more exotic, and she was so happy to be able to travel even into her 80s. One thing that never changed was her love for family and friends. She was a mother to many and had a way of making everybody feel important and very loved. Her husband, Jack Christopher, preceded her in death. She married Jack in 1946, and they lived in California while Jack went to San Jose State to study industrial arts. After graduating, they moved to Nebraska but returned to California in 1952. She is survived by her daughter Kay Sims, son-in-law Philip Sims, granddaughters Heather Goodland and Amber Nicoletti, grandsons-in-law Jonathan Nicoletti and Grant Goodland, great-granddaughter Phoenix Goodland, all in the Yuba Sutter area. Daughter Lee Davis, son-in-law David Davis, grandson Casey Davis, great-granddaughter Carter Davis, and great-grandson Avery Davis, all from Green Cove Springs, Florida, as well as several nieces and nephews throughout the United States. A celebration of Jane's life will be held at her cabin in the mountains in Grass Valley on Saturday, November 11th. And so here we are, gathered together to celebrate the life of Elizabeth Jane Christopher. As I sat with Kay and Heather and Amber to prepare for this day, one thing that really stood out to me was the exceptional quality of character that Jane possessed and demonstrated throughout her life. And as the family shared their memories of their mother and of their grandma, a beautiful passage of scripture came to mind as an appropriate description of Jane herself. Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31 is often called the virtuous woman proverb because it describes a woman who lived by a set of values that was exemplary and very outstanding to those around her. The passage is attributed to the mother of King Solomon's son, who herself was reputed to be a woman of virtue. In Christian communities, this passage has presented an inspiring goal for the shaping of character for women throughout the ages. The cultural details of the virtuous woman's tasks may be different in our era, but the principles are timeless. And I believe Elizabeth Jane Christopher's life is a representation of the character of the virtuous woman that is described in the proverb. I'd like to read it to you now. A wife of noble character who can find? She is worth far more than rubies and diamonds. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax, and she works with eager hands. And she is like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is yet dark, and she provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. She considers a field and she buys it, and out of her earnings she plants a vineyard. She sets about the work vigorously, and her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. And in her hand she holds the distaff, and her fingers grasp the spindle, and she opens her arm to the poor, and she extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed, and she herself is clothed in fine linen and purple. And she makes linen garments, and she sells them, and she supplies the merchants with sashes. And she herself is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom. Faithful instruction is always on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed, and her husband also, he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who knows God is to be praised. Give her the reward she has earned, and let her works bring her praise to the city gates. So the parable says, the proverb says, a good woman is hard to find and worth far more than rubies and diamonds. Her children respect her, they call her blessed, and her husband also, he praises her. The word blessed in this passage means to be happy, to be prosperous, successful, contented, right, to be straight in a way that produces the very most out of life. And Jane embodied all of these attributes. Even early in life as a youngster, Jane was industrious. She liked to make angel food cakes, I'm told, and would travel door to door in her neighborhood, toting an electric mixer and volunteering to make angel food cake for anyone who desired one. Jane's work ethic continued to be strengthened when she spent time with her dad at his garage, enjoying the time spent with him, as well as the moments when he taught her practical things. Jane met her future husband, Jack, during World War II. Engaged at the time to a boy named Ralph, and out on a date, they stopped to pick up a hitchhiker one cold, snowy night. The hitchhiker turned out to be Jack. Somehow, he got Jane's contact information, and when Ralph shipped off to war, Jane corresponded with Jack and eventually eloped with him. Jane remembered reading about herself in Jack's little black book that she had a very nice smile. And as most of us know, so she did. It was a warm, friendly smile that really welcomed you into her presence. Jane did have a spark of rebellion in her otherwise conventional life at that time. In addition to eloping to avoid a large wedding that the family would have preferred, she married Jack in a smart blue suit, as she said, instead of the traditional wedding gown. And Jane was very proud of this. She enjoyed telling that story. Jack and Jane were true feminists before their time, believing that there were no stereotypical gender roles for women. Mechanicking, carpentry, woodworking, Jane did what needed doing, and Jack supported her in this. As a hobby, Jack and Jane hunted for rocks and semi-precious stones together. They traveled all over the United States, unearthing unusual stones such as jade, opals, and agate. Using their car like a jeep, they often bounced over formidable terrain to get where the rocks were. And in the winter, they traveled to Blythe, where a community of rockhounds gathered to share their hobby. Jane, ever independent, continued these trips to Blythe, even after Jack died. As a mother, grandma, and great-grandma, Jane loved her family. On one trip to Southern California, for her own interests, I believe, Jane's timing proved providential as it coincided with the arrival of Lee's child, Casey. Jane was able to be present at the birth and for a time afterwards, providing the comfort that only a mother can give. Jane's sense of family extended to a larger group of friends and those she considered her children, many of whom are you all that are gathered today. And indeed, Jane was a universal mother to many, including George, Sarah, Penny, Chris, and others. She was a good listener, she was appreciative, and she was grateful for everyone and everything around her. She was also a safe person who could hold a confidence when necessary. One of the highlights of the year during her life was inviting all who would come to the property in the Redwoods near the Russian River. Jack and Jane set up camp there, which opened on Memorial Day and closed on Labor Day. And when camp was in session, Jane became the quintessential hostess, cooking, feeding, organizing, welcoming, cajoling, and entertaining her guests. Late in life, when her mind began to wander, she would again imagine herself as a hostess there, giving directions and gently scolding those who are not helping her in exactly the right way. Her daughter Kay remembers the family home always being full of friends who were welcomed in. Add a little broth or another potato to the soup, slice the pie or the cake a little bit thinner. Make do with what you had and never turn people away, because friendship and hospitality were the most important things to Jane. I myself was the recipient of Jane's hospitality more than once. One memorable time stands out to me. I had a friend of about Jane's age who was a ballet dancer in New York City, and she came out to visit to take some master classes. And Kay suggested that we contact Jane for a place to stay while she was here, and I remember Jane just welcoming us into her home as though we were truly family. And even though she'd never met my friend Blanche before, she treated her like an old chum. And indeed, they corresponded for years afterwards. And my friend Blanche never forgot, even up into her 90s, she lived to be quite old. She never forgot that kindness that Blanche held out to her. And each time I would speak to her, she'd remark about it, and she'd ask after Jane, I'm sorry. And Jane was a person who endeared herself to others through her kindnesses. I think most of us here can think of specific instances that attest to that. And she remained in memory long after an encounter was over, and I was thinking what a marvelous and awesome legacy that is to leave behind. It's a gift that she gave to all of us. Jane did love to travel and was not afraid to be daring when she did so. Later in life, snorkeling became an activity that she enjoyed. The family remembers her once losing her glasses, which she wore inside her mask, and they sank to the ocean floor. Attempts to retrieve them by the family proved futile, but Jane bravely carried on and swam to shore even though her vision was a bit hazy. Jane liked roller coasters, I'm told, and as was her way, made lemonade out of what could have been a bitter lemon experience. When her health began to fail and she needed a wheelchair to get around, she was always happy to be the wheelchair person so that her family could go to the front of the roller coaster. Jane never dreamed that she'd be able to travel the world as she did later in life. And she was very proud of the fact that into her late 80s, she was willing and excited to travel. And although waning health made travel more difficult and often even painful at times in later years, in between trips, Jane forgot about the discomfort and the hardships, and she became excited and started anticipating the next adventure. A great pleasure for Jane on her trips was picking out the perfect souvenir gifts for her dear friends at the Sutter Estates. She treasured her friends there, and she treasured their company, and she thought of them even when she was in far-off lands. Jane's last big trip, this is amazing to me, lasted for several weeks and involved an Alaskan cruise, a backwoods exploration of Alaska by train, and a stay in Vancouver. And Jane especially enjoyed the train, I'm told, where she was given an extra large, roomy berth and encouraged to use a special lift that made the trip much easier. Jane was 90 when she embarked on the Alaska trip. Towards the end of her life, Jane treasured her cat Merlin, which she assured Heather and Amber was the very best gift that she'd ever been given. Jane liked the fact that both she and Merlin had white hair, which made them simpatico. At the very end of life, Jane's mind would have fantasies which the family enjoyed playing along with. And as it had throughout her life, Jane's spunk remained intact. One day, after she'd become bedridden, she told the family that she had baked a batch of cookies. "Oh, that's great," Kay responded, to which Jane replied, "Well, can I have one, please?" Caught off guard, Kay quickly searched for a cookie, and the fantasy became a reality. Proverbs 31 tells us this: her children respect her and call her blessed, and her husband also praises her. For a good woman is hard to find, and her worth is far above diamonds or rubies. Elizabeth Jane Christopher's life embodied the attributes of the virtuous woman described in this proverb. And as such, she continues to live on in our hearts and in our minds.